Hey guys, welcome back to Film Truth. Today we'll talk about whether jade mining is easy. Let's head into it. Jade mining. Jade is a decorative mineral that is best known for its green varieties, though it can also be found in other colors, most notably yellow and white. Jade can refer to one of two silicate minerals, nephrite, a calcium and magnesium silicate in the amphibole group of minerals, or jadeite, a silicate of sodium and aluminium in the pyroxene group of minerals. Jade is commonly used in East Asian, South Asian, and Southeast Asian art, but it's also popular in Mexico and Guatemala. The rarity and value of jade among pre-Columbian Mesoamerican cultures, such as the Olmec, Maya, and various groups in the Valley of Mexico, influenced its use for symbolic and ideological ritual in Mesoamerica. Despite the fact that many Mesoamerican peoples created and valued jade artifacts, the Motagua River Valley in Guatemala was previously thought to be the region's only source of jadeite. Myanmar's jade trade consists of the mining, distribution, and manufacture of jadeite, a type of jade, throughout the country, Burma. The jadeite deposits in Myanmar's northern regions produce the world's highest quality jadeite, according to Chinese sources dating back to the 10th century. The meaning of jade is significant in Chinese culture, and as their influence in Myanmar has grown, so has the jade industry and the practice of exporting the precious mineral. Myanmar is responsible for roughly 70% of the world's supply of high-quality jadeite. Myanmar's jadeite is mostly exported to other Asian countries for use in jewelry, art, and ornaments. The big tragedy.
Hundreds of jade miners had no time to escape. Dozens were swept away.
In Myanmar's infamous northern jade mining town of Pakant, the tragedy was all too familiar. Hundreds of jade pickers teetered on the edge of unstable mountains in the early hours of the morning to scavenge the loose debris dumped by trucks. They are convinced that discovering a valuable stone will change their lives forever. When a heavy landslide hits the bottom of the mountain, miners are immediately engulfed by a wall of mud. Hundreds of people vanish in an instant, leaving families in the dark. The landslide last year was the deadliest on record. At least 175 people were killed when the Waikar mine collapsed on July 2nd, mostly men in their 20s from as far away as war-torn Rakhine State. Last year, at least 50 people died after being buried alive by the mountain, and 113 people died in 2015. Each disaster prompted calls for the jade mining industry to be reformed. The tragedy at the Pakant mines is a human-made disaster, not a natural disaster. The central government's poor management of natural resources and environmental mismanagement, as well as flaws in the extreme centralized quasi-civilian 2008 constitution, are the main causes of these deaths, according to the Kachin Development Networking Group. Pakant in Kachin State is the epicenter of jade mining, with 14,000 hectares of the country's richest deposits. Despite the fact that the mine was officially closed on June 30, unauthorized jade pickers continue to operate in the area. The majority of the time, such workers will return home empty-handed or with a few dollars in small stones. If they find large pieces, the company or boss for whom they work will take the stone and the profits that come with it. Victims' families are unlikely to receive any compensation from the government or the company their loved ones worked for due to a lack of transparency in how these companies operate. Broken promises and scant oversight. Civil society organizations monitoring northern Myanmar have compared the ruling National League for Democracy's response to calls for reform in the wake of recurring landslides to that of the military junta. State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi's NLD government promised to implement real reforms when it came to power 5 years ago. But weak legal frameworks persist and little progress has been made. Instead, Suu Kyi pointed out that the miners there ignored the fact that the mine was already closed, saying the majority of these victims are illegal miners. She went on to say that getting legal jobs is difficult for the country's citizens and that creating jobs should be a priority. Myanmar watchers are skeptical that the government's announced investigative body will produce any real results, or that new regulatory measures will be strengthened. Repeated landslides with high death tolls have been blamed by critics on the government's unwillingness to enforce safety standards and on the mining companies that are permitted to operate in Pakant. 5 years after taking office and promising to reform the corrupt sector, the National League for Democracy has yet to implement desperately needed reforms, allowing deadly mining practices to continue and jeopardizing the lives of vulnerable workers in the country's jade mines, said Global Witness, a London-based environmental watchdog. The longer the government delays enacting strict reforms in the jade industry, the more lives will be lost. This was a completely avoidable tragedy that should serve as a stark warning to the government. Myanmar's government joined the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, EITI, in 2014 to improve transparency and accountability in the country's natural resource management. The goal was to create a public list of active oil, gas, gemstone, and mineral licenses, but much of the information is still missing. In the same year, it put a 2-year moratorium on new license applications. Critics argue that the gemstone law, which was passed in 2019, does not go far enough to curb illegal mining. Because a separate gemstone policy has yet to be implemented, a more viable and long-term approach to mining jade has been thwarted. Freed from sanctions, jade business thrives. After nearly 2 decades of American sanctions against the military junta that has ruled the country for half a century, the Obama administration changed course, believing that real political reform was taking place in the country. After democratic elections restored civilian rule, then President Obama met with Suu Kyi in September 2016.
It is an extraordinary pleasure for me to welcome State Councilor Aung San Suu Kyi and her delegation to the White House,
and announced the lifting of all economic sanctions. After consulting with Suu Kyi, Obama revoked several executive orders related to Myanmar's sanctions in December, and he lifted additional restrictions on US aid to Myanmar. Transparency watchdogs slammed Obama's 2016 statement, which stated, "It is the right thing to do in order to ensure that the people of Burma, Myanmar, see rewards from a new way of doing business and a new government." The lifting of economic sanctions meant that a long-standing ban on Myanmar jade imports, as well as companies associated with the country's operations inside the country, would be lifted from the Treasury Department's blacklist. The US government is dropping one of the best sources of leverage over former generals, drug lords, and military companies who still secretly control critical industries like jade, said Juman Kuba of Global Witness at the time. Many people are disappointed with the NLD's lack of progress 4 years later and argue that the lifting of sanctions absolved the military of responsibility. Coronavirus changes. Despite the fact that the novel coronavirus has so far spared the country with only over 300 cases, it has shut down most of the corridors used to trade and smuggle jade, namely across the Chinese border. This has already had significant financial consequences for those in the jade trade who are unable to survive without buyers.
For many, the economic impact of COVID-19 has been far more devastating than the virus itself.
As a result of the pandemic's economic desperation, an increasing number of people have turned to working in the black market for local jade bosses. The Mandalay jade market was closed in March after the government prohibited large-scale gatherings. It remains closed, but jade is bought and sold behind closed doors. Internal travel restrictions and quarantine measures are in place within the country, limiting people's movement. Flights have ceased and Chinese business has slowed significantly, but the border remains open and some people have crossed it. What do you think about jade mining? Do you still think it sounds easy? Let us know in the comments section. This brings us to the end of our video. I hope you enjoyed it. Hit like if you did, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss any of our videos in the future. Also, watch the 2 videos that are on your screen because I'm sure you'll love them. With that, I'll see you in the next video.